Hey guys, welcome back to another video. This video we're going to talk about how to crush live low stakes no limit games with this super simple strategy, this super simple thought process. So I think a lot of you overcomplicate the thought process in the live low stakes games. The first thing you want to ask yourself is, does your opponent have a capped range or not? Can they have nutty combos or not? If you can figure out the answer to this question, you will gain clarity, clairvoyance. It'll help you formulate your strategy as far as how aggressive you need to be or not be, and then what size makes the most sense with the hand that you have. And we'll get to what, how we should think about our hand or our range, if you will, in a few slides. And that's going to be incredibly simple too. But first and foremost, if you can figure out how strong your opponent is as early as possible, it's really easy then to formulate a really straightforward plan to attack. So we need to ask, are they capped or not? The second part of that is what price, meaning what price do we need to set to accomplish the goal that we want with our hand? But more importantly, what we want to accomplish as far as if we know what our opponent can have, if we know if they're capped or not. And, I'm not saying that we're going to know exactly what kind of hand we have. Like a lot of players will say, well, I put you on jacks. Narrowing your opponent to one particular combo is asinine. They can have a lot of different combos. But if we have an idea of where they're at in the range as far as like, are they uncapped, they can have nutty combos, then yeah, that changes things a lot. But if they can't, then that changes things as well. And we can start acting more aggressively. We can use maybe over bets and such. So what price do we need to lay to get a specific part of their range to maybe call, or a specific part of the range to maybe fold, or call now so that they can fold later? And we'll get more into that when I get to the hand replay and we go over a hand example where we're going to use a dynamic flop and we're going to be in position in a single raise pot. One of the most common scenarios that you guys are going to run into, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Last but not least, where are we in our own range? I like to basically chop up my range into thirds, guys. You can see here value, showdown value, and then bluff. And bluff with a question mark, meaning that the top third of our range or the top of our range are value combos. Okay, yeah, depending on if our opponent is capped or uncapped, and then what price, those are the questions again. We can bet a lot of the combos in that top third there, that top third of that circle, that little circle on the slide that you guys see there, we would bet for value. The middle portion of your range could be about like the second pair, third pair, really good ace high combos with a good kicker. Hands that have kind of medium equity, like kind of lower equity draws. Like these are hands in the middle that maybe they benefit from seeing cheaper turns or rivers depending on obviously the action we've seen beforehand. And then the bottom third of the circle, the bottom third of your range, if you will, bluff, question mark. Do we have combos in the bottom of our range that make sense to start bluffing with? Combos that don't have enough showdown value, but they make sense as bluffs. Like maybe they block some of our opponent's continues. Maybe they have equity if called, or equity that we might pick up on future streets in the form of back doors or two pairs that we might turn with, like a bottom pair that we bet flop with. But there are going to be also potentially some spots where we're not going to be betting our entire range. Now, we may be on the flop in position when I show you guys in this specific spot, but there are going to be parts of your range at the very bottom that it just, at some point, it doesn't make sense to continue with your foot on the gas. You're just going to be burning money at that point. So, yeah, these three thoughts that we have, going back real quick, cap range, why? We want to gain clarity. We want to figure out how strong our opponent is before we really start making like brash decisions, if you will. What price? That ties into a capped or uncapped range. What price do we need to set to get what we want out of our opponents, out of that part of the range that we think that they're in? Do we need to go really large to get them to fold a hand that's kind of in the top third of the range? Or do we need to go smaller to get them call with a hand that's maybe in the bottom, half of their range, if you will? What price? Are they capped? Are they uncapped? I'll show you guys what I mean. It's a lot easier when I show you on the hand replayer. And then last but not least, where are we in our own range once we figure out where our opponent's at and what sizings might make sense? That kind of all goes hand in hand with, where are we at in our range? Do we have a value combo, right? Do we have showdown value? Do we have a bluff or a potential bluffing candidate? All these will tie together. And now we're going to transition over and I'm going to show you guys what I mean in this hand example, where we're going to go over if we have a hand that we want to maybe start betting and barreling off, or not barreling, so to speak, but we continue betting for value. Do we have a hand that has showdown value that maybe we slow down with? Or do we have a bluffing candidate that we can continue acting aggressively with. Stay tuned, and we will look at that next. Okay, so we've obviously transitioned over to the hand replayer. Let's get started here. So we get a limp, and this is a 1-3 game. We have effective stacks of 500. And let's say we have pocket eights. We go ahead and we raise to 15 against the one limper, and he calls. And so we get a texture of queen 8-5 two-tone. What were the questions that we wanted to ask ourselves? And guys, this is what I first go to, is that obviously I want to have a general idea of what the stack to pot ratio is going to be. We're well over, let's see what we actually have here. Roughly 10, 11, 12, 13. I mean, it's well over 12 with quick math. We know that we're in a deep stack situation here. So that's obviously something to keep in mind. If you have relevant info on your opponent, if they're passive or more aggressive, that can help you formulate your decisions too. But let's say it's an unknown, and in the live low stakes games, you do run into some deeper situations such as this. So what did we talk about in the slides? What's the first question we're going to ask ourselves? Is our opponent capped or are they uncapped? Well, right now it's really hard to know because we're on the flop, and that's where your opponent's range is the least defined. It's the widest. Could he... Now, we do have a little bit of a better idea against limp callers, and that's the beauty of trying to isolate the limpers, is that we believe he probably wouldn't limp call with a hand like tops or like pocket queens, right? Pocket eights is possible, but we now block that. That's impossible to have. So we know he can't have top or middle set. He could have some bottom set. He could definitely have some pocket fives, and they might limp call with hands like queen jack offsuit. You can maybe see like queen 10 suited, queen 9 suited. So it could be some top pair in there, and then you'll get a lot of different like pocket pairs or pair plus draw hands. Like you could get some flush draws in here, a hand like 7-6 of spades where you have the open ender, backdoor spades. So yeah, there's still a bunch of stuff, but they are going to be a little bit capped in the sense that they won't have top or middle set. They're not going to have the over pairs and the aces or kings. They're probably not going to have ace queen or even king queen. So I would say they definitely are capped, and there's an argument then that in theory, if they're really capped, you can go really large if you think that you have a pretty significant nut advantage and we're not capped ourselves. But our strategy, our baseline strategy, and again, what price? So like if we still aren't quite sure, and before we start really making brash decisions, using really large sizings or trying to basically build a really large pot in position, we would like to get a little bit more info out of our opponent. So what we can do is when our opponent checks to us, which they most always will here. Now, we'll have content over at archcitypoker.com where we talk about when we get led into, could make a YouTube video out of that as well. But let's say our opponent checks, which is the vast majority of the time what they're going to end up doing. We like to use an amount that's somewhere in between maybe third pot and half pot. It's not really that big of a deal if you go 10 or if you do go something like 15, which I think is a good number here. The reason we want to do that is on the more dynamic textures, especially when they're wet like this, where there's just so many nut changing runouts where you have, like if you get a diamond turn, Jack 10, 9, 7, 6, 4. I mean, there's all kinds of turns that change what the current nuts are. So with this board being as dynamic and as wet as it is, your opponent is going to act incredibly straightforward against you. And this is a really good sizing. Like I said, up to about half pot. And if you guys are a lot deeper, you could argue going a little bit more than half pot. I wouldn't go too much larger than that because it's just not efficient. It's not necessary. But this sizing, what it will do is it will bring the truth out of your opponent. They will fast play on this kind of board when they have two pairs or better. And they might check raise, like if you get an opponent that doesn't understand how deep we are, doesn't understand the whole capped versus uncapped dynamic, they might check raise some top pair. That's something that obviously we're going to find out more about them later. But basically, if they check raise here, they either have like a two pairs or better type of hand, maybe some top pair, and then they have a really nutty like combo draw. Could be something like ace 5 of diamonds, could be a hand like jack 9 of diamonds maybe, where they have the gutter and the diamonds obviously as well. But the vast majority of the time, you're either going to see a call or a fold here. And so obviously if they fold, video's over and there's nothing to talk about. But let's say he does call, which is what he's going to do a large portion of the time here against this sizing. So when they call, and let's say we get, let's start with like a brick turn for now. Keep it pretty simple. This is where we again ask ourselves now, and we ask ourselves the same questions again. And when we talked about where we're at in our range, that's not as important in the flop. We were just going to bet everything for small anyway in this type of spot. So that's a question we're going to save for later. But now we have more info from our opponent to know and answer the question, is he capped? Is he uncapped? Well, when he just check calls for that sizing as the limp caller on this flop, I would say he's very capped. I mean, unless he turned a set of threes, he's pretty much going to show up with a lot of pocket pairs, like pocket sevens, sixes, maybe nines. They might raise more of those, but you'll still run into some players at 1-3, even 2-5 that will limp those if they're really tight. Generally speaking, it's going to be more like 7-6s, pocket fours. It could be an 8x hand, like 8-7 suited, 8-6 suited, ace-8 suited, king-8 suited, etc. Could be weaker queen. But what we do know is that, and this is the thing too, you guys will spend too much time overwhelming yourselves with the question of, well, like, what am I trying to put him on here? Like, yes, you're correctly trying to narrow his range. Start with what they can't have. If they are capped, then you know that they can't have better than top pair. And their best hand that they have is likely a hand like a weak queen, like queen 9 or queen 10, maybe queen jack at best. But a hand that you know is not going to be able to hold up over 3 streets of aggression. So when that happens, when we get a turn like this, okay, and they will check to us again, now what price is a question that we're asked, because on the flop, we were using that same price with whatever hand we had no matter what. So we didn't really have to ask those questions. But now, once we figure out, okay, he's not, or he's capped, this is now a situation where do we get him to continue for a large sizing with a hand like a 5 and a diamond draw? Or let's say a hand like 7-6 for the open ender. Like, are those hands that are going to call pot or more as like often enough, or as often as they would call something like half pot here? And typically, guys, on the dynamic or wet textures, a lot of their range that calls the flop will in fact call a large sizing on the turn. And so when that's the case, when we feel that they are essentially not price sensitive, it's what we refer to in the industry as inelastic, meaning that if they have a hand like 7-6 of diamonds here, which, yes, again, that might have check raised flop. But let's say they do have that big of a draw and they're a 1-3 player. Maybe they are a little more passive. That hand is going to call $100 here just as often as it's going to call $35. And so we want to make sure that when we're up against a capped opponent who is able to call bigger bets with as often as they would call smaller bets with a lot of their range, we're not only going to take our really like nice value hands and continue betting for value here, but we're also going to put in big bluffs, because what will end up happening is, again, go back to, are they capped or are they uncapped? We are able to put in a large bluff here and set them up to where we get a maximum amount of value out of their range to get them to fold then on the river. A lot of you guys get really tied up in like, well, I want to bet large here because I just want to fold him off of whatever he's chasing me with. Like, I don't want to get sucked out on. I don't want him to see a river. Like, you'll see guys here that they'll have a set and they'll bet, I would say correctly, but they're going to bet, let's say, like 75, or they not a lot of them, not a lot of you guys will ever like overbet. You should definitely do that more often. I'm going to show you why here again. I've basically already said it, but a lot of guys here will bet like between 50 and 65, and they'll think to themselves, well, yeah, I want to bet and I want value, but like I really just want him to fold. Or they'll bet with, like, let's say we have top pair, or we have a hand like jacks and we think he just doesn't have a queen in his range, and we continue betting. It's like, yeah, I just want this guy to fold. I just want to get him off his equity. I just want to end the hand. I don't want to face a river, right? That's not the way to think about it. Like, we want him to be involved with his capped range. If we had to answer the question with the answer yes, is if he is uncapped, or essentially if I ask if he has a cap range, no, then we need to be careful in that spot. And that's for another video where maybe we have, I mean, I guess I could put in like a turn here that's makes him not as capped, like a flush completed turn. I'll show that in a minute. But this is a situation where when you have dynamic flop like this and you get a turn that doesn't really change the nuts, we're always going to err on the side of going large, because they can still call with a bunch of stuff for the large sizing. And it's nice because we get calls when we want value, but we also keep them in when they have weaker parts of the range when we're bluffing. We get that value out of that hand. We want them in there so that we can then bluff them off of whatever river essentially comes. So let's say he does check. Oh, I didn't check back. Let me go back. We're going to have to fix that. So our opponent checks. And I would say, so what we would do here is we're really deep. To play for stacks here, we'd have to probably bet really large. So we're going to bet something a little bit over 2x pot, right? So we bet 135. And this is kind of what I was talking about, guys. Well, let's say now that he calls. Again, is he capped or uncapped? Well, for that sizing, in theory, if you have a really big hand, you should do a lot of just calling because your opponent's putting in so much money already that you're going to be able to play for stacks in a lot of rivers and you want to keep them barreling, right? But in the live low stakes games, we're going to change this. And let's say we get, not that, that's 3, we did it backwards. Let's say we get the 9 of clubs on the river. Okay, so, and that left us with essentially pot on the river. I would probably want to go a little bit smaller on turn so we have a little bit more than pot on the river if we maybe had to bluff. But yeah, this is where it gets a little more interesting is that now that our opponent has called the 2x overbet, my thought process he's not necessarily capped, or I'm sorry, yeah, he is capped, but I think he has the top of his cap range where he has essentially like a queen. Probably has like queen jack or queen 10 he's getting really sticky with, or he has a really big combo draw. Like he either has like he either has nut diamonds he's just not folding, or he has like ace 5 of diamonds, a hand like 10-9 of diamonds, jack 9 of diamonds. It's definitely possible that he has those. So a lot of times they will just lead into you if they do hit on the river. So we do like when we face checks, which will face the vast majority of the time here. But guys, let's say he does have a hand like queen jack, queen 10, queen 9. Like, do we think that calls all in for pot here given how much he's already put in? I think he does. Let's say we go back though and we don't go quite so large with the 135. Like let's say we go maybe just 100 and he calls. And so now we set ourselves up with a scenario where we have a little bit more breathing room to throw in an overbet bluff if we needed to for value. But if we felt that he was capped to like having a queen and that's it, or maybe we think he had a hand like 10-9 or jack-9 that he had the diamond draw with it, now he picks up second pair, there is room now to where you ask yourself the same questions again. Is my opponent capped or uncapped? Well, he can have 2 pairs on the river here, I would say, with like some of the, like he can have queen 9, potentially like queen 9 of spades, queen 9 of hearts. There's only a few combos of those, obviously. And then there's only one real combo of jack 10, and that's jack 10 of diamonds. So I would say he's got like 3 or 4 combos of the nuts, but then he still has like a ton of queen X, a ton of missed diamonds, a ton of like basically top pair or less combos here. If we think that a lot of his range is the top pair or less combos, we might be better off just betting like pot here and betting like 260, maybe 250. And you get him to always call with those hands pretty much. If I got here, though, with, again, we talked about going back, where are we at in our range? Bluff, question mark. Like, let's say I got here with a hand like 10-9 of spades, where I bet flop for small. I continued with the overbet on the turn. Okay, he didn't fold, but that's fine. We're okay with keeping him in the pot because we think we can get him off the river. Now we've rivered some showdown value, and that's where we get to the middle part of our range on the river here. Like if we had 10-9 of spades, it's a tricky one. I think you have enough showdown value to where you could just check back and you do still beat a lot of his missed draws. You beat a lot of his pairs. However, if you think that you can get him off of his best hand, which is very often just queen 10 or queen jack, then throwing in 370 into the 265 with your 9 and turning that into a bluff is absolutely a consideration that you should make. And if your opponent is capable, and most of them will be, of folding just like a weaker queen here for the overbet, you should absolutely bluff if you think it's even close, if you have showdown, like whether you have showdown value or not. Like if you somehow ended up getting to the river at this point with jacks or a hand like queen jack yourself that you think I can't get value, but I think I have really good showdown value, that's just going to be a check at this point. But if you get there with less, like let's say you were barreling, like let's say we just have air here, we're going to bet all 370. Let's say we have worse than the 8. I think it's important to understand that an 8 will be a part of his range that maybe gets sticky like this. So if we have a hand like ace 5, I think we just need to rip it in here. And even if you have ace 5 of diamonds, guys, and some of you guys that are better players and think about concepts like what you block and unblock, let's say you had ace 5 of diamonds. Well, we block his flush draw that you might have been calling with. Well, that means it's just a little bit more likely that he has like a made hand like a queen. That doesn't matter at this point. We know he's capped. We know he's not getting to the river with enough 2 pairs or better. So we're able to put in the 370 even if we have flush draws that we missed with, and we're going to get him to fold that queen the vast majority of the time. So you can see how flop, when we go back to our strategy on the flop here, guys, it was basically, if I can get it to work here, it's basically bet flop or bet range for smallish, like half pot or less on this dynamic texture. We asked ourselves, is he capped or uncapped? And we're not sure yet, but when he calls, capped. So we've answered that question. We get the 3 of hearts on the turn. He checks. We now go ahead and put in the overbet. Why? Because we think that he has a lot of combos on a dynamic texture that are going to call this bet just as often as they would call a smaller bet. So it makes sense for us to take the top part of our range. Again, going back to where are we in our range? If we're at the top with value combos, it'd be like our king, queen, or better, essentially. We're going to go ahead and put in the overbet. If we have combos in the middle that are showdown, have good showdown value, if we had like an 8 here, if we had pocket 10s, pocket 9s, ace king even maybe that we think has some showdown value against a lot of like the draws that he has, we could check back with that middle portion of our range. And this is where we start to polarize. We talk about this more over at archcitypoker.com. You basically start betting more the top and the bottom of your range. But yeah, let's say we had bluffs here. Let's say we had a 5 that we felt didn't have enough showdown value. Let's say we had gutters, flush draws, any straight draws, any kind of air that we think blocks some of his best hands. Let's say you have king jack here, king 10. Those will kind of indirectly, or like even jack 10's a great one, guys. Like it's probably the best one where you have the gutter because you block queen jack and queen 10. So that's a really, like, that's kind of where you get more in the weeds. You become a better player. You understand what you block in your opponent's range. But yeah, like we would have air like that. We would bet really large here. So again, going back to that slide, again, top, middle, bottom. The top and the bottom are going to do more betting here. The middle is going to do more checking. So we've answered that question of where we're at in our range, where we're at the top with our set, obviously. Really easy one here for simplicity purposes for the video. So I bet large. Again, we're going to ask the same questions. Capped or uncapped? He just calls. Now, this is a much larger bet, so I think he's higher up in his range, but it's still a capped range. Like, he would just go all in here if he turned a set of 3s, or if he slow played a set or a 2 pairs in the flop that they sometimes will do. It's really rare. We don't have to really worry about it enough to worry about putting too much money in spots like this. Now, if it's a static texture, then we would have to worry about that, of course. Or if he's capped or uncapped, we'll go back and we'll do this again here on the when I go from flop to turn and I change this turn from a 3 of hearts. But yeah, again, capped or uncapped, we ask that question. He calls capped. So we get to the river, and this is where it changes a little bit. What price is going to be more important? But we still got to answer, is he capped or uncapped? We still think he's relatively capped. Yes, he could have rivered a few combos of straights or 2 pairs. Maybe like maybe, I don't think pocket 9s as much. I don't think that's really in there, guys. But yeah, he's still relatively capped. And so we're going to be able to bluff for the maximum, and we're going to be able to, like, essentially, what do you want out of your hand? Like, if you have king, queen, and you block some queen X here, and you were trying to get a hand like 8-7 to call, thinking that you missed a flush draw, then you might just go like $100 here, guys, and you'll get him to call. It's what price best accomplishes what you want out of not only, you know, what part of range we think he's in, but where you're at in your own range. And that's where you start putting those slides together and those bubbles together. And this gets much more simple the more often that you review videos like this, the more often you review your own hands, the more often that if you're not even in a hand, guys, at the table, you should pay attention to, like, try to practice this when you're not in the hand and you're watching 2 opponents. Ask yourself about both of them. Who's capped? Who's uncapped? What price would you use watching the aggressor? Like, what price do you think makes sense there based on the actions of his opponent? These are ways that you can get better. Like, instead of being on your phone, your tablet, reading, talking to whoever else at the table. I'm not saying you can't socialize or you can't take a break, but if you guys are struggling and you really want to become better players, you really should use every hand at the table in your session as practice. Try to range opponents, figure out if they're capped or uncapped. Use that same question if you are, you know, taking the spot of the hero in the hand. If you're not in the hand and you're watching the pre-flop aggressor, and I say the pre-flop aggressor because that's what we're going to be the vast majority of the time, guys. Ask yourself what hands would you put into your value range, your showdown bound range, your hands that have showdown value, and then your bluff question mark range, whether you have air or bluffing candidates. Like, ask yourself, like, on the queen 8-5, if you're not in the hand, what bluffs make sense to you after you bet range on the flop in position? What bluffs make sense to continue with on the turn? What hands have good showdown value that you're like, you know what? I don't want to build the pot any more than it already is. Let's just check, try to see a river. Then we can decide if we bet again for value or do we bluff catch against our opponent's bet. That's obviously another part of the game tree that we'll save for a different video. But yeah, if you can ask yourself these questions, capped or uncapped, what price makes sense, and then figure out where you're at in your range, it makes the game incredibly simple, guys. So I promised you, let's go back and actually change the turn. We bet flop. We have our middle set. Our opponent calls. This time, though, we're going to change the turn to a flush completing turn. So we're going to have the 3 of diamonds. So now, once we see the 3 of diamonds and our opponent checks, we ask ourselves, is our opponent capped or uncapped? Well, this is a lot different. This is a nut-changing card. Flush draws can definitely be a part of his range. Now, it doesn't mean he always has a flush, of course. As a matter of fact, he doesn't have a flush that often, but he has it often enough that we do have to consider the fact that he is, in fact, uncapped, and he can have nuttier combos in his range. So when that's the case, it actually, to me, makes a lot more sense. Our opponent's checked. I believe it's on us now. That we actually like to go smaller over at Arch State Poker. Between 20 and 25 here, it'd be roughly around third pot to 40% pot. The reason, oh, that didn't work. Let's change this, guys. So he checks. No, we're not betting. We're going to change that. Apologies, guys. Let's say we bet 20. So we bet small. And the reason that we like to do this is, again, if we don't have as much clarity. We talked about, again, that answer to that question, whether he's capped or uncapped. We want clarity. We want to get more info out of our opponent's range. Well, when he calls flop for small, yes, he was capped as far as he doesn't probably have 2 pairs or sets. But now that we get a nut-changing turn, now especially if this was like, let's say, a 4 of diamonds where it brought in the open-ender and the flush draw, it's even more of a dynamic turn. But yeah, because he can have enough flush draws in his range, we now want to find out where he's at. And we're going to answer those questions, or ask those same questions, and then answer them, guys, based on what he does here. If he just calls, it's unlikely that he has a flush, right? It's unlikely that he turned a set. Like, he would want to either get value and or protection for those combos. So if he raises here, we have a really good idea that it's up against a flush. It would just be a money problem. Like, if he raises small enough, there's definitely implied odds to trying to see a river, hit your boat. If it's somebody that you know is actually not a nit and they can raise here with, say, the lone ace of diamonds, or they can turn like a diamond plus pair type of hand into a bluff, then obviously you can do a lot more continuing against them. But let's say the vast majority of the time, like, let's say your opponent raises really large here, you get a really bad price, you can make hero folds with sets if you know they always have a flush. Like, if your opponent makes it like 120 here, as long as there's not enough money left behind, it's pretty easy to actually just fold in that spot. But what will end up happening the vast majority of the time, let's say he has like black pocket 7s, he'll just fold here, right? But they might call with like a queen or like an 8, or if he has a hand like 6-5 of diamonds and he's like, well, maybe my diamond's good, I'm getting a cheap price, maybe my pair's good. The point is, when he just calls, we know he's capped. So now we get to a river against a cap range, and let's say, just for sake of purposes, let's change this. Let's say he has, let's actually say a queen comes in, and we think that his range is a fair amount of queen X now that he doesn't have flushes. So again, we ask the question, capped or uncapped? Well, we believe he's definitely capped in a sense that he should not have full houses, right? He didn't check raise flop, didn't check raise turn, so we know he also doesn't likely have flushes. The best hand he can have here now is likely trips, and then anything that's lower than that. So like, is anything like pocket 7s here going to make a call against any kind of sizing? Probably not. But if he does have a queen, then this is a situation where if he checked to me, guys, what price makes the most sense? Like, is a queen going to fold? Or is a queen possibly going to continue here to say into a $100 pot? Is a queen going to call against 450? It might. It's definitely going to call against 200. And so you can maybe say like, okay, we put 200 here in with our king, queen, or better, right? If we unblock the queen though, and we have boats, this is where we're getting a little into the weeds, guys. We can take our boats here, and I say we actually go all in because we unblock the queen. That's like, I would save this usually for a more complex video or for the site subscribers that are paying for more in-depth content, but I am going to throw you guys a free bone here that's how I would think about this spot, figuring out where I'm at in my range. Like, how much do I bet here? Like, do I bet 100 or do I bet overbet all in? If I have a boat and I know my opponent can't have boats and I unblock the most likely hand that he actually called us down with, we want to put all 450 in here because there's a really good chance you get called. But let's say you have the queen and you block trips. It might make sense, guys, to actually put in like 75, because what will end up happening is he'll possibly make a hero call with hands that are worse than trips. Like he essentially has a pair and he has two pairs, or he's going to raise you and you know that he has a worse kicker because he was capped. Like he limp called pre-flop. He shouldn't have king, queen, or ace, queen. So if we have king, queen, or better, and he raises, we can get it all in and we're going to get all his money. But if we do have, say, a hand like kings here, and we're like, you know what? We think that he might call something really small, like $40 here on the river, and he'll call us with like an 8 or make a crying call with like pocket sevens. But if he raises, we know they're not bluffing the river with check raises often enough that we know he ran into trips and he got us, and that's fine. We're still going to put in that smaller bet with the kings. Again, what part of our range are we in? What price makes the most sense for our hand at this point? And what price makes the most sense as far as what do we like? Where's he at in his range? What price makes the most sense that we throw at him to get him to react in the way that we want? So you can see how there's really different scenarios where, and the other part of it is like, what if we're bluffing here, guys? What if I have Jack 10 and I get to the river at this point? A lot of players will either just say, well, I missed and they'll give up, or I have Jack high and the really bad aggressive players will say, well, I'm going to bet 450 because I think that's the only way I get him to like fold a queen, or I know I can fold out his range. Guys, if he has a queen, players are not in the live low stakes games. They're not driving to the casino to fold trips. Like 450 into 100, yes, there's a chance that you do get him to fold trips a fair amount of the time. But let's say I did have Jack 10 here. I don't think it's going to let me change my cards at this point, but let's say I did have Jack 10 of spades here, guys. If I get check 2 on this river, I would bet something like, I think 100 works really well if you bet pot, because what will end up happening is you're going to get snapped off by the queen no matter what you probably do, but you're always going to usually fold out worse than that. So if you had like your kings or your aces and you want to bet like $50 here, half pot, you get them to call with some of those hands. But you see how the price, they become more price sensitive. That's a question again, is like, what price? Are they price sensitive? Are they inelastic? Yeah, they are here because a queen with trips, they're going to be price sensitive. But if they have a pair that's worse than that, like pocket sevens, like I said, guys, that might call a $40 bet if you have kings or aces, but it's probably going to fold to pot or more. So let's say you felt like maybe I need to go a little bit more. Maybe like the best price is 125 with Jack 10 here. You get him to fold ace high hands where he picked up the nut flush draw. You get him to fold pretty much everything that's worse than the trips, but you're not overextending and overreaching and unnecessarily putting in 300 or something like that. And you're folding out everything for the cheap price anyway. But 300, you're getting called by the trips no matter what. Whether you bet 100, 340, it doesn't matter. And like I said, once you start getting into the really massive overbets, can you get some of your opponents to fold? Yeah, and that's where player info definitely helps a little bit more. If your regulars on average are much more passive, much nittier, then yeah, you could probably rip 450 here and get them to lay down a queen quite often. But like I said, you guys got to be really careful about that. Be really mindful that your opponents are very likely not driving to the casino to fold hands like trips or better. So in this point, when I, again, have the actual hand I have, unblock the queen, I know he can't have boats, I'm just going to rip 450 here, and we're definitely going to get called enough of the time to make that better than betting like 100 or betting like 40 to make sure I just get value. But if I do have those hands like kings, aces, king, queen, or kings or aces are the main ones. Even a hand, like let's say we have jacks or tens, guys, you could bet like 50 here. And yes, it's more in the showdown value portion of your range, but once you ask those questions over and over as far as not over and over, but once you ask those questions one after another here, as far as each street is concerned, capped or uncapped, what price? Once you get to this river, if your opponent has trips or better, they're just going to win, and you can still, like, you're going to lose the 40 that you would go for thin value with jacks or tens. But if you have jacks or tens and you bet 40 here, you might in fact get called by hand by like 8x or pocket sevens, like I said. So don't be afraid to go for thin value, guys. That's what we want to do in the live low stakes games as often as we can. But just keep in mind, ask yourselves the questions from the slides. Capped or uncapped, why? Gain that clarity. What price? Are they price sensitive? What part of their range are we trying to target, and what price do we need to use to accomplish our goal? And then where are we at in our range as far as tying this all together? Do we have a hand that it makes sense to go really large after we basically bet range on flop here? Does it make sense to go really large with hands in the top or bottom of our range on the turn against his capped range? Do we have some middling hands that might want to check back? Once he calls turn on the river, that's where we start to split the strategy a little bit. Like, do we have maybe some sizings that we can use for to get him to call for value when we have like a smaller sizing, when we have a hand that's not trying to play for stacks just yet? Do we have a hand that does want to play for stacks? Do we have a situation where if he is capped, then we can throw in relentless amounts of overbets? But when we get a river like this and he's not necessarily capped and now he has trips, that's different. We have to be careful about trying to bluff him off of that. But let's say we change the queen real quick. We change it to like a 5, I guess. He shouldn't show up with too many 5s. But yeah, let's say we think now he just has top pair, or he has like missed draws, or he has like worse than top pair, he just has second or third pair. This is now a spot where you can start thinking about the overbets much more often. Why? We asked that question. Is our opponent capped or uncapped? So I know that a fair amount of this was pretty redundant, guys. The thing is, it's by design. I'm going to repeat myself on purpose at times in videos because this game is redundant and these spots are going to come up over and over again. So the more often that you, like I said, you study your own hands that you review, or you review hands on this platform or over at archcitypoker.com, where we even get in more depth and there's way more examples like this, the more innate this is going to be, the easier it's going to become to easily ask these questions quickly in real time. Capped or uncapped? What price? Where are we at in our range? You tie these things together, it makes for a really simple thought process, and you can use it throughout the hand. And it's not like you have to know like what to do exactly on what specific types of turns or rivers. Capped or uncapped, you're going to be able to go from there and build your strategy at that point to where you're playing as efficiently as you can against these live low stakes opponents. So if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and of course let me know. And I do encourage you guys to share if you want to see a different texture than this. Like if you want to see a static texture in position next, or if you want to see like 3-bet pot out of position, that'll obviously be different than this single raise pot in position. But let me know. We'll start with those questions again: capped or uncapped, price sensitive, where am I at in my range, and we'll go from there. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. That helps us out a lot. And then come visit us over at archcitypoker.com, and we will be able to help you guys, of course, improve immediately over there. So look forward to see you guys in the next video, and thanks.